Well, hello, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to Community Health Education. I'm Ann Gonzalez. I serve at the LCMS in the International Mission Department, and I work with short-term mission teams. So I work with volunteers who are going overseas to serve, and as a part of that role, also got trained as a community health evangelism trainer. So today we're going to learn a little bit about community health education or evangelism. It goes by both, also known as CHE. And CHE is a tool to improve the health of a community and to share the gospel. And there's many, many ways that it's used in those ways, but at its core, that's what it is. And it's founded around some principles. So it's learner-centered. It's focused on the needs of the learner, but also that you can apply it immediately to your life. It starts with a problem, some kind of real-life, real-world problem that you're trying to solve. It invites people to self-discovery, so learning things about themselves, about their community, getting that aha moment. It's action-oriented. You don't just learn about it, you learn what you can do. So if you're learning about clean water, you learn about why it's important, but then you also learn how in your community you can make clean water. And it's spirit-guided. The whole thing is bathed in prayer, through the church, and all that. And on your left, those letters, it spells out lepsis, which is not really a word, but it's the acronym they use to kind of help us remember those things. Interestingly enough, I am currently also in school to get my master's degree in instructional design and technology. And these are exactly the things that I'm learning that adult education should have. Now, okay, not spirit-guided because it's a secular kind of thing, but everything else this is good educational theory as well. So I am wondering, what brought you here today? Why did you decide to come to this session instead of something else?
I'll go ahead. I am in outreach areas at Christ Our Savior lives in Livonia, Michigan, and have been working with our organization, Livonia Cares, to reach out to those who are less fortunate, in need of maybe health care, in need of rental, utility assistance.
Okay.
And trying to understand what avenues may be there in working with some of the special programs that the government does provide, reaching out with the gospel message in those social ministry areas.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you.
I'll go. I'm on our board of evangelism at Trinity Lutheran Kalispell, and we do a Feed the Flathead, and so just to learn more.
Okay, thanks. So you're on the board of evangelism?
Help with their community kitchen,
Yeah. Okay.
I would say I am from a small congregation in northern Nevada, and just always looking for ways to grow our church, and how can we what are some innovative ways that we can meet some needs in our community, and also share the love of the gospel and grow our church.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything quite that specific. It's of interest to me.
Okay.
We have, I feel like sometimes our church, our congregation is pretty good at doing mission trips
Out there.
far away.
Yep.
But maybe not so good close to home.
Serving home, close to home. Okay. Yeah. I will say the principles that CHE is founded on help you do mission trips far, far away well, because it's all about creating local ownership and local problem solving, and therefore avoiding dependency and people coming in and just doing for you. So we're actually going to experience a CHE lesson today, because I think that's the most helpful way to do that. So I'm going to ask you to do that very un-Lutheran thing and break into small groups that you're actually going to talk to.
Is your small group?
Yeah, I would say do a group of 2 and a group of 3. That would be good. And if you can kind of move your chairs so you can actually see each other, that will facilitate conversation. And go ahead and introduce yourself to your group. Share a little something about yourself.
Small farming community about 60 miles east of Carson City. Is that all I'm supposed to do? Just introduce yourself.
Just introduce yourself, yeah.
I'm a chairperson of religious education, and I'm also a sound person IT person. In a small church, you get to do
Speech language therapist by profession and career background.
Our two church, actually the elder and his wife, who are just and myself, their grandson. How big is Sierra Leone? I'm just asking.
So I work with Dan Brown. I work at the Church Extension Fund. And so what I do is I work with all the schools in our zone. So over there.
I think in that area there's probably 30,000 because we have
So I haven't been there.
definitely. Yeah. And we know our kids go on to
I'm Harold Elston. I'm the director of the Collaborative for Neighborhood Transformation. I live outside of Kansas City, Missouri. I am the urban model of Che. I run everything for you.
So really, he should be giving this presentation. Yeah, yes, indeed.
What you guys want to do? No, my goal is here is to sit in. How can I help you do what you're doing better?
Awesome.
Give you tips and tools.
Thank you.
Things like that. Whatever. I'll give you my cards, and if you want to know more about how to get more in the urban areas and apply these principles, you're more welcome.
Awesome, thank you.
I'm not giving you a report card at the end.
So the problem that we're going to start with today is actually going to be in the form of a story. So once there was a village on the top of a steep mountain, and please don't judge my drawing skills. On a regular basis, as people were walking down the mountain, somebody would slip and fall. Sometimes they got hurt, and a few people even died, which is a terrible, terrible problem. So a short-term team came to the village, saw the problem, and wanted to help. And they thought, and they said, we will get an ambulance so that when somebody falls down, they can get rushed to the nearest hospital 10 kilometers away. So they went, and the village said, this is a great idea. So they went home, raised some money, bought the ambulance. It worked for a while, but then it broke down, needed repairs. Nobody did anything about it until somebody fell again. And then they were mad because the short-term team was not taking care of their ambulance. So the short-term team raised some more money, got it fixed. But then the next time it happened, they said, this is too much work. We're going to just, we can't do this anymore. It's your problem. So representatives from the church came, saw the problem, and said, what we need is a clinic at the bottom of the mountain. And that way, when somebody falls, they can get treated right away, right there, on site. Makes sense. So, but then several times the clinic ran out of drugs and people were upset, or they were closed for the holidays, so they got some more staff and tried to fill in, but kind of the same thing eventually happened. It's just too much work, too much trouble, too much money, and so the clinic closed. Now the people didn't know what to do. The two solutions that outsiders had provided for them, the ambulance and the clinic, didn't work. So they didn't know what to do, but they still had this problem. So an older man stood up and said, I had this idea at the beginning, but nobody was willing to listen because the outsiders were going to provide all the money and all the things. But if we, with a little bit of work, we can cut some wood, and a little bit of money, we can get some cement, and we can set a fence along the path to keep people from falling down in the first place. And so that's what they did. And after a few years, the wood began to rot, but they fixed it themselves, and life went on, and people were safe. So now, instead of looking to the outside for help, they began to look to themselves. And when people came and wanted to give them something, they said, no, thank you. If it's important, we will do it ourselves. So every Che lesson starts with something a little bit like that. It might be a skit, it might be a story, it might be a video. And then we're going to go through these questions. You're going to talk about this with your group. So first, what do you see in this story? Yep.
Go outside, viewpoint, trying to help, but mostly not really comfortable.
After the problem has already, like, after it's already happened, then
So what did you see happening?
Somebody from the
People knowing
outside.
what was best.
Okay, outsiders.
And I think well-intentioned, maybe is worth,
Yes, they were well-intentioned. There was no malice here. Okay. And normally I would have asked somebody from the group to also be the scribe. Normally the facilitator doesn't do both roles, but since we're already a very small group, I figured I can write. So now talk with your group about what is happening. Sort of what's the bigger issue?
Help you solve the problem. Again, well intentioned, but
and it's really hard to have issues, real life, real life issues, right? So these outsiders come, and staff, and we place to help. And then in this particular case, they just some other things. They were trying to help me rely on even more. And we are next talking about this.
All right, so what did you see happening in this story? Or what's sort of the bigger issue?
People getting hurt, I mean, basically a safety issue.
Okay, it was a safety issue, but in terms of how it was trying to be solved, what was happening? Okay, they were giving them the fish versus teaching them to fish. Okay. All right. Does this happen in our place?
Yes.
Okay. Why is it happening?
Because both parties are in agreement to allow it to happen.
Because both parties are in agreement to allow it to happen. Okay.
That's a really good answer.
Flesh that out a little bit more for me. How do you?
I was just
Yeah.
I was just sharing with them, for some reason, free school lunch program comes to mind.
Okay.
So, back in the day, when I was a kid growing up, my mom would send me with 50 cents for hot lunch.
Right.
Or a cold lunch or whatever. Then
And you ate breakfast at home.
and I ate breakfast at home.
Right.
And then as I went to school and became a teacher, then we had free and reduced, where
Right.
families who were on reduced, you had to fill out a form,
Yep.
prove your need. And then now in my school, now every student in the school district gets free breakfast and free lunch. And it's like, I'm not saying that that's wrong, but
Right.
but we have taken away the opportunity for them to learn to fish on their own. I'm kind of mixing my metaphors.
That's fine. That's fine.
So you take away a mother and a child, a mother making pancakes and sharing the time to have breakfast and, I don't know.
Okay, that helps. Yeah.
Well, and you take away the child learning what makes a healthy meal because they don't ever have to make their own. It's just here.
Relationship between
Yeah.
the family dynamic, yeah.
Okay.
Why is it? Because doing relief is easier than actually helping to create change.
Correct. That is a whole different presentation. So But one of the most eye-opening things that I learned after I came to the LCMS was the difference between relief and development. So relief is when you stop the bleeding, you know, if there's a hurricane, people are gonna die if we don't just give them stuff. And that's appropriate in that situation. But when you treat chronic poverty like a hurricane, it actually worsens the problem long-term because you take away people's ownership of their own lives and create dependency. Yeah, yes. So what can we do about it? The initial thoughts.
Be smarter about it.
Be smarter about it, okay.
Be more in tune maybe to the people that you're trying to help.
Okay. Yeah,
Helping kind of like a mediator to work with the local leaders.
okay.
To decide what is, say, an immediate need, what is a longer term goal, and
Yep.
what is a pie in the sky
Kind of thing.
solution.
Yeah, okay. All right. So with your small groups, I want you to discuss what are the potential hazards of solutions designed and funded entirely by outsiders. What are the challenges of what are the hazards of solutions designed and funded entirely by outsiders?
And it's real attention, sometimes that attention comes coming out what they probably need to themselves to do.
First time or two is kind of exciting, like last, showed up to all the local, did like a lot of stuff with the kids. So they went back, it's like, all of a sudden, what is this idea
All right, let's bring it back to the larger group. What were some of the hazards that you identified in your small groups? Potential hazards of solutions designed and funded by outsiders.
We threw out a couple of words, but he had a really good example, dependency.
Dependency, lack of engagement, yep. What else? Do you guys have any other ones?
It's the ownership of the issue.
Okay.
Which is
Yeah, it's related. Ownership of the issue, okay. Anything else you guys thought of? Are solutions designed by outsiders culturally sensitive and the most practical way to solve the problem?
But oftentimes not.
Oftentimes not, yes.
Well, I think we try, as outsiders, we try to solve a problem based on our own
Right.
Without living out a word from my college anthropology class, our own ethnocentrism.
Right, yeah. I've heard.
The only things I remember from that class.
Oh, so unsustainable or impractical solutions. I've heard, I cannot verify the truth of this urban legend, but I've been told that, in some places where North Americans went to go build a house for people, and they built the house, and then nobody ever used it because it wasn't built to the usual local specifications. Yeah. All right. So that does not mean that we should just never try to help anyone because we're outsiders and so therefore we can't do anything, right? With your small group, talk about what can outsiders bring to the table? What pieces can you bring or can outsiders bring that are not going to develop dependency? How can they help teach the community to take control of their own development?
That's good.
I'm not sure that's what she's doing.
There are no right or wrong answers in Che. Every piece of input is valuable. So, listening? Ah. All right.
Listening to see what the true need is, and not what the
Yeah.
present.
With it
Like
unbiased.
the ringer I can.
Yeah.
So
She said not emotionally attached to that issue.
Oh, okay, so
Maybe they have lots of.
emotional distance.
Yeah.
Okay. So outsiders can help with that. All right.
What did you say? Emotional distance?
Yeah, not being emotionally attached, like not maybe I've lost a family member, getting injured down the hill.
Yeah. Whereas an outsider really doesn't have a stake in it in that way. Okay. Other thoughts? What can outsiders help? How can they help to teach a community to take control of their own needs?
To help them to understand that it is not an immediate or a quick fix,
Okay.
that it has to be a long-term goal.
Okay. Long-term role.
I think that
So like a long-term partnership.
Correct. Well, maybe not using a specific, helping organization to come in and to
Right.
work constantly alongside of them, but just helping them to know that I am not going to be able to solve your issues, say within even a year's time.
Sure.
It
Okay.
can be
So it requires
30 years down the line.
long-term solutions.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Different types of knowledge.
Okay. So expertise. Assuming it applies.
Correct.
Yeah.
So could financial resources fit into that picture based on how they were going to be used?
that's exactly what we were.
It could, I think,
Okay.
based on how it's going to be
That's why we have
used,
this,
Good.
but also to match, at most match and not overwhelm the community's contribution. So So yeah, as an example, this isn't exactly a Che example, but in Africa, in Eastern Africa, some of our partner churches are very, very poor. And so building an actual church building is a challenge sometimes. And so there is a grant that churches can apply for from the LCMS to help them with that process. Generally, the grant pays for the tin roof, which is the most expensive piece and allows it to stay in use for a long time. But the church has to match that investment with an investment of their own, not necessarily of direct money, but in that part of the world, many people build their own houses. They know how to make the bricks out of mud and whatever, and so there's a labor investment so that they will build the walls, and then this grant will help put the roof on. But I would also say, like, whenever possible, you don't. Okay, any others? Any other things? Do all communities have assets?
Yes.
Yes. Do all communities recognize that they have assets? Correct. So that is something that an outsider can do. They can help people see that they have things to bring to the table.
What are you defining as asset?
Not necessarily money. How would you define asset?
She learned well.
Yeah.
Say talents among the group.
Okay, so
Like
things
you
that,
were just mentioning the people who know how to make bricks or.
right, okay. That is one thing that's an asset, is the skills that the people have. What other things could be assets that you could help map?
People resources in that community
Okay,
for getting a project run.
okay, so in terms of like leadership or volunteers?
Leadership, maybe an area of expertise for construction.
Sure.
Or for somebody who is within a school district, knows school administrators and helps to tie the connections in, or city resources to tie them in.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's people. All right. Local resources could also include things like you have clean water, you have access to a river, or you already have a garden. I know in one, actually I'm trying to remember if this is a Che story or not, but it works. In one inner city example that I've heard of, there was a vacant lot. Okay. And it was weed filled and full of trash, and you look at that as an eyesore and not an asset, right? But if you clean it up and plant a community garden there, is the land itself an asset? Yeah, yeah. So sometimes it's also just a matter of seeing what you have through new eyes. All right, any other thoughts on how outsiders can help teach the community?
The clarification.
Sure.
Are you thinking more national, like within the United States, or foreign?
So, are you an outsider to any communities in the United States?
Yes.
Yes. So it's both. It's either. It can be used either place. And even if it's not outsiders, you can help your church see they have gifts, they have resources. You can help people work together and build each other up rather than that one person at church always doing everything.
Right.
The 20% of people that do 80% of the work, right?
To answer that, I'll go on that.
Sure.
Being an outsider, you live in a neighborhood, right? That is your community. You would be that. You go to another neighborhood, you're an outsider, because you do not live there. You might live in the same general area, but you're still an outsider because you don't live in that community, so if that helps. Like working from one side of the city to another, you might live in Phoenix, but you go to Scottsdale, you're an outsider, you're there.
Right. And sometimes it's not even about where you live. So a third of my congregation in St. Louis is African immigrants. And I am definitely an outsider in that, community, even if we lived on the same block. So,
And then break it down like in rural Kentucky in one area. If you're not born in that,
oh, forget about it.
you're not from that community.
Right.
You know, if your kids are born there, then they're part of the community. You're still not.
Right.
You will still be an outsider until you die.
I have a terrible example of that. My dad's a pastor. His last call was to a small congregation in Illinois where the community and the community perception was you were either born in or married into that church. That was a very strong insider-outsider, feeling at that church. That changed. What can we always do as Christians? Pray. Yeah. Love, yeah. How do you show love? What does it take to show someone that you love them?
Listening.
Listening, okay. And can you do that quickly always? Takes time, right? Yeah.
And it takes time to build relationships too, so. if
It
you're trying
does.
to Work with a group of people, they're not just gonna go, oh, yeah, come on in, let me tell you everything about
Right.
myself, it's gonna take
Right.
a
Yeah.
long time before they trust you.
And I would say-
And right there, change happens at the speed of trust.
Yeah.
And I would say on our part, the patience
Yeah.
the patience really to guide them to, solution because.
Yeah.
I think so many, with a 21-year-old son right now who's in a holding pattern, so
Right. That takes patience. Yeah. Yeah.
I think I'm better at it than 2 years ago, so.
Well,
But
that's good.
Patience in this,
Yeah.
that's what you-
So I added start small. In Che terms, it's called seed projects. So you start with a neighborhood trash pickup, and everybody feels like, wow, we can do something about all the litter in our neighborhood. And that's not a huge thing. You're fine. Come on in. Join their group.
Yeah.
All right. So with your group, I want you to take a minute and try to come up with a definition for community ownership, since we're talking about building community ownership.
Shannon, just to clarify, is that community ownership of a project or?
Community ownership of solving their own problems.
Gotcha.
Why don't you come over here and talk with these ladies? Sorry. Of community ownership.
In other words, we're discussing these questions are supposed to how to do.
Any decisions that can be made. What to do to solve their problem. Stakeholders. You really don't know all this.
It's okay.
I can't tell you.
Well, what good are you then? I'll send you over to the.
Community ownership should outlast transitions should be like so well that it's real. Don't make it too hard, don't make it too hard. What did we talk about on the mountain story at the end? Okay, when the community takes ownership of their own problems and they're not putting their own self, they're finding their own resources, doing things together, to solve their own problems without the assistance from anybody else outside. Which is what, if you look at what was seen and what was happening, and you go through, have answers. I'm sorry.
I'm going to kill you. No, I'm kidding. Oh, great. This is on the recording, too. We're just having a good time here. All right. So what'd you come up with? What did you come up with for a start of a definition of community ownership? Any thoughts?
Our new person who was awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Equipping the receptor group to identify their own challenges and come up with ways to solve them. Okay.
Say that again.
Equipping the receptor group to identify their own challenges and coming up with their own solutions.
Okay. Was yours close? Different?
Well, I guess just that word equipping, so so then thinking, so what do? So do you have like community meetings and you find out who the natural leaders are in that community and who are the elders
Yes.
that people listen to?
Yes. Now, I'm going to push back a little bit on the word equipping, only because when a community owns their problems, do they need someone else to equip them anymore? No. So the group actually, the community now identifies challenges and comes up with their own solutions. Yeah.
Okay. So is it more, instead of equipping, maybe facilitate? Could an outside group facilitate
Correct.
to identify?
To move them to community ownership. An outside group can help with that. But community ownership itself is when the community has the skills and owns the process. All right. So, we can talk about this as a large group. How did your understanding of community ownership change during this lesson?
I don't know if mine changed, but I put it into words better.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
Put it into words better. Okay.
Well, and then probably also looking back at the times that I thought I was being helpful in a situation and really I wasn't being very helpful, or I didn't do it quite the right way.
Sure. Yeah, I sympathize with that. When I finally read When Helping Hurts, that's a book about dependency, all of a sudden I was like, oh, all those times on youth mission trips that I felt like, hey, why isn't this person doing this for themselves? But I feel really icky, like trying to verbalize that. Yeah. So, yeah. Anybody else? How's it changed?
I think for me a little bit, it's in sometimes recognizing, like following a national disaster.
Okay.
And that group does need very quick help, assistance, whether it be financially, whether it be clearing fields after a tornado.
Yep.
Or after a hurricane. And that there are two different types of needs in that way.
Yeah, there are. There are. And if you're interested in being a part of that, check out Lutheran Early Response Teams. They provide training so you can go respond to disasters and be helpful rather than hurtful. Yeah. All right, why is community ownership important? I feel like we've talked about this a number of times, but let's revisit one last time. Why is it important?
Hey, can I
Yeah.
ask about an example of something too that has been okay? I'm just curious if this would be more, the example is, not the Lutheran church we went to in Billings, but one of the other LCM Lutheran churches, they made the commitment for 5 years to go up to Canada and run a VBS for a pretty rural,
Okay.
impoverished community up there. And they would go, and it was a 5-year commitment. They'd go up
Okay.
there every summer, I think probably the same week in July to do that. And went and taught the VBS. I don't know if there's any training for the community after 5 years.
Right.
You know, when their commitment to that was done and went away, if that meant it
Yeah.
could happen for those children in that community beyond that. I'm curious about that. And I was thinking about that example as we've discussed this, equipping them to, and it wasn't outreach, I mean, it was VBS. But I
Right.
just wonder after 5 years if it didn't happen anymore for them.
Yeah, and that, without more information, I cannot say one way or the other. Because of course, sharing the gospel is always a good
Yeah,
thing.
oh, absolutely.
But also, if there's no church or follow-up or anything like that, then you're basically creating spiritual orphans. So there's that. So it would depend on how much of a partnership there is with the local church. Are they co-contributing to this VBS? And also, are there steps towards, if there isn't a team anymore, or if there's a pandemic and you can't get there, then what? Yeah. I know with LCMS International Mission, we send a number of teams to Poland every summer to do English Bible camps. And it's an opportunity for kids in the community to get to know those weird Lutherans and learn that they're not crazy. Well, historically, the Lutheran church in Poland was the German church. And if you were a real Pole, you were Catholic, even though you might not do anything about that or know anything about what that means. And so one of the stories that I actually just heard this week was a community where we've had the same team going for a few summers running. And they've been following this church on Facebook and stayed in touch with the church leaders. And they said, when you came and did English Bible Camp with us, you showed us, you modeled for us that we could open our doors to the community. So now this church is doing, concerts and, other outreach type events where they invite the community in. And some of the parents of some of the kids that came to the Bible camp were confirmed into the church and things like that. But in that situation, the Polish church that's hosting us, they provide some of the supplies. They provide the translators. They provide, so they're not just sitting back while this team puts on a camp. It's truly something they do together. And the Americans bring the expertise in how to speak English. And the publicity draw, honestly. Because if you can send your kid and learn from a native English speaker for a week, it's a pretty big draw. All right.
Sorry, I interrupted.
No, it's fine. I was trying to remember. I don't think we actually answered the question. You had an example. Why is community ownership important?
I just keep going back to giving a fish versus teaching to fish.
Okay.
How much more valuable that is.
That you can then feed yourself.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And teach others.
Indeed. Now, you know how to solve your own problems. You look at the resources you have, and you can also share that with others, what you've learned. Yeah. So I am going to have you go back to your small groups for this. How can you encourage community ownership in the areas where you work?
So does this include just in my neighborhood, or does it include some type of outreach to a designated area?
Yes, all of the above.
She's very good at passing.
I work for Untitled. I actually, urban version of this.
I'm from Livonia, Michigan, outreach,
So I work with
assimilation,
churches and
women's ministry, and
nonprofits,
local
teaching them how to
congregation.
get outside the four walls and start helping.
Outreach, assimilation, women's ministry are my areas of ministry. Yeah.
You'll be able to use the flag. Hold us more, you have families to be very, very. Yeah, so just. Oh, I'm from, we're doing with First Contact.
And so you're part of LCM and you're a church member? Connection our church has, it's called Food Feed, and we collect furniture. Bring furniture to us, and then we'll pick it up and we deliver it to them. And it's pretty regional, and our church is famous for it. Really good work that they do every day. Part of this. Except there's no sharing of the gospel at all. And it's not as if we aren't allowed to, it's just like we drop off some furniture and we leave. Okay, so what was I going with? So part of it is in this, or maybe I could call it where the three of outreach things. When we think we would do for the ways but we're not only in the section of gospel. And so how do we make that our own worship as Christians? Better to funnel this into the ministry of the church. And see that be us holding this in a right way. Not in a kind of throw some money or some time or some furniture. Am I saying that right?
So, talk about people. Regardless of whether it's just whatever religious obvious here,
I'll give you 1 minute to wrap up your conversation.
we call it the Ruby course.
Right, exactly.
Anyway, that's, when you said that, I think,
That's a good one. That's the most sense to you. You did have some prayer meeting set up at a community fall festival. And I was on the board when we set up, you stand up and pray, and you realize they're walking by. And I was amazed when people saw us how we wanted to with them, for them, over them. Yeah, it was very interesting.
All right, let's bring it back to the large group. Anybody want to share what you talked about with how you could build community ownership in the areas that you work with? It sounded like you're having great conversations, so if not, it's fine.
So, I don't know if I went the right direction, but I thought my own community, which is the church, and whatever outreach we do to it, to the community, for example, we have a furniture sort of
Sure.
ministry. For us to really own that in a proper biblical way is to have the gospel as part of that, not just giving our time or our muscle to it.
Okay.
So how can we be more intentional about making sure they hear the invitation of the gospel, bring them into Word and Sacrament ministry somehow?
Yeah.
Or at least make it easier for that to happen.
Sure. I'm curious. Could you invite the people that you're serving into the ministry itself? Because now, as they have received, they can give. Now, sometimes that doesn't always work. Maybe it's not practical. Maybe the distance. Maybe they don't have the gas. Whatever. I don't know all the situations, but it's a whole lot easier to build that relationship and to have the openings to share the gospel when you're hauling furniture all day long or whatever.
So then really your focus is not the people you're delivering furniture to, the people, your target is the people who are now helping you deliver furniture.
It's both. It's both. But yeah. So.
Well, I think that's the thing too, is when you just, if you have something like that and then you just slow down long enough to just really pick it apart and talk about the opportunities of what you could do.
Right.
Man, it's amazing how many different layers you can come up with.
It's true.
Different ways
To engage
modify,
people.
tweak it,
Yeah.
make it
Mhm.
better.
Yeah.
And just going to because originally your idea was that your church is the community and for them to grow in the ownership of that ministry, and especially making it more gospel-centered. And so maybe you already do this, but one idea would be to create a brochure that just has information about the church, and then maybe on the back side it has a simple little outline of the gospel about sin and grace and Jesus and faith. And then everybody who comes into the store, whether they buy something or not, or take something, they would get a brochure. And then someone from your church could just be the bridge of wanting to not only give the brochure, but also to create a conversation which would start a friendship.
Yeah.
Each person that comes.
Thank you.
I don't know if Christian Friends of New Americans is here. I don't think so. But they're an organization in St. Louis that works with immigrants and refugees. And so I was just thinking of them because they have a lot of experience with how do you get from the thing to the relationship and empowering people. So any other thoughts about how you could build community ownership in the areas that you work?
So, just very briefly, for me, we're about to start a new Hispanic church plant in Las Vegas, and so
Okay.
in my mind, the community is this new group of believers that are going to be formed.
Right.
And so the church planting team, what we need to be thinking about is right from the beginning, how can we help the new believers understand that this is their congregation and it's their own, and they're responsible for it, and they can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I won't go into all the little strategies, but that is the mindset that we're using to come in.
Right. Because what I've seen happen otherwise is a church has that kind of ministry for a number of years, and then all of a sudden they get to the point where they're like, well, we've been supporting them all this time and nothing has happened and they just need to do it on their own now. But have you taught anyone how to do it? You know, and so building that scaffolding, that's great that you're starting with that idea. Yeah. So I like this lesson because it is a good example of a Che lesson, but it does have one thing that's unusual. Many Che lessons have some sort of biblical tie-in at the end, and this one does not. And so by a biblical tie-in, I mean if you're teaching a lesson on 7 healthy habits, things you can do to always stay healthy, at the end you would talk about your spiritual health and how Jesus can, you know, grow that. If you're talking about how to brush your teeth, you could draw the analogy of cavities are like the hole that sin has left in our heart, and here's how Jesus, you know, fills that in, that kind of thing.
Could you, for 30 seconds, just
Yeah.
get me up to speed on what Che lesson is?
Sorry, yes. So community health evangelism or community health education is sort of the model that this is coming out of. It's a participatory learning style, hence why I had you talking to each other, that helps people learn from their own problems, basically. And that's what these questions were about. What do you see? What is happening? Every Che lesson starts with some sort of problem that you're posing. In this case, I told a story about a community on a mountain where people kept falling off the mountain. And so, you know, outsiders came in and their solution was to buy an ambulance or to build a clinic. And when the community finally owned the problem, they were like, well, we can just build a fence so people don't fall off the mountain. So in a nutshell, does that help bring you up to speed?
So yeah, okay.
I'm going to give you some more. There is more. So I know a number of missionaries who are using this in other countries. The lady in the front there is Amy Sima. She serves in Cambodia. They actually were in Vietnam for a number of years until the government declined to renew their visas. So she is actually just starting up a women's group meeting, and they talked about parenting, you know, a common topic of interest to everyone, everywhere. And she's using sort of the Che model to work on this parenting group and help the women learn how to be better parents. Apparently, historically, traditionally, Cambodian parenting style is very, very strict. And if your child has food and clothing and goes to school, that's how you show that you love them, without any other, you know, affection. And so helping the women learn from each other on how they could break that cycle. And she's just in the very beginning stages of getting this group going. But same kind of thing, that at the end, they talked about how we can never be perfect parents, but that, you know, Jesus is there forgiving us and also working alongside of us. This is Steph Schulte. She's a registered nurse, serves in West and Central Africa with health ministries. She was recently invited to a series of church meetings in the Republic of Congo, and she gave 3 women's health lessons about the value of a woman in God's eyes, basic hygiene for women, and healthy eating. And this one especially is always eye-opening for women, that they have value, because that's not what the culture teaches where they are. Now, so she's not doing a full-fledged Che program at this point. There's a whole, community health evangelism has a whole process by which you enter a community, get to know the community, help the community, build community ownership, train their own people, and then, you know, kind of move on. At this point, she's, go ahead.
I'm curious about how many years does that take, is there?
A lot.
Yeah, okay.
You have the answer, I don't.
It goes a long time. There is no set stone.
Yeah.
You figure, okay, like even in a neighborhood, how much time do you want to go through, right? In a neighborhood I worked in California, right? I was there for 3 years daily, just getting to know the people, trying to figure out what the root cause was in this neighborhood of the poverty, because it was one of the worst of the worst. Between alcoholism, drug addiction, prostitution, child prostitution, homelessness, I mean, you name it, everything all within a mile and a half by a mile and a half area. That was the defined neighborhood. It took me 3 years to even figure out what was going on in there, because people are transient, kind of go back and forth. Who's a person of peace in there? Who knows everybody? This and that, and then you got to go. It's not for, okay, 3 years, we're out. You got to go, what do you want to try to get accomplished in the first year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? You know, and if they can take care of their own problems, you can then pull out, cool. If not, but are you there for the long term? Because the problem that you get is people come and go so much, and there's no trust. They go, okay, they're here, they didn't get what they want, oh, they shared the gospel, now they're gone.
Right.
You know, so.
I was more just curious if there was an exit strategy to sometimes your lifelong there.
It just depends.
It depends, yeah.
Everything is different.
So we did have a missionary in, I think it was Kazakhstan, but it might have been Kyrgyzstan, sorry, who she was one of the first LCMS missionaries to really like get the Che model and get trained and whatever. And so they did implement it, and so they have trainers there now locally, and what they call Che's, the actual educators who go out and share the information that they're learning. And they had to leave a long time ago because of, I don't know if it was visa or whatever, but we no longer have people there. It's the local church that is continuing to replicate and run this program. So, yeah. So, like I said, Steph, she taught one trainer of trainer courses in East Africa in 2020. And so they were trying to start the whole, program up where they would have other folks who were trained and could, work alongside them. Well, y'all know what happened in 2020, right? But it was also a blessing that they had just done this, because one of the things you learn about is like how to wash your hands properly and how you can build out of found materials in a place with no running water a hand washing station. So yeah, so it was God's timing. But she often gets invited to come and teach at things to the women's groups, and so she does some of these. And people always, the women are always amazed at what they've learned and seeing how much God loves them. And sometimes she does a longer series of lessons, and in the cases, if it's an actual, there's a program called Women's Cycle of Life where there's an actual certificate at the end. And you take a woman who has maybe a third grade education and you give her a certificate that says, I know stuff. I mean, that is huge in just building into her, pouring into her that she has value and that she has assets and that she can share those with others. All right, we talked about that. Okay. So, I think we've talked about this, how Che might benefit your ministry. Yeah? Okay. Next steps. If you want to formally use Che, well, first off, you can always learn more. I'll put up the website for the Che network at the end, and you can check that out. If you want to formally use Che, you need to have at least one person trained as a trainer. It's what they call a training of trainers training. It's abbreviated TOT, T-O-T. And so somebody would need to go through that. And then you have access to the wealth of resources that have been shared. So Che is really a movement, I would say, that it's a loose affiliation of a lot of people who are using these ideas and these principles. And you can write your own lessons. There's a huge library of lessons that you can use. And even though health is in the title, not all of them actually have to do with physical health. They might have to do with emotional health or learning English so that, you can improve your day-to-day, things like that. So if you formally want to use Che, that would be the next step, is to get someone trained as a trainer. And that's the training I went through. It's usually about 5 days, although there is now, or is in development, an option to take that online where it's more spread over time. But it is a fairly serious commitment. But you can also informally use the ideas that we've talked about today. These 5 questions are the ones that always start out every Che lesson. And just by taking a problem that you see in your community and sitting down with a group of stakeholders and having them talk through some of these kind of questions can generate a lot of conversation and interest. So this is me, if you want to know more. Actually, I realized that I failed as a trainer. I was supposed to have a handout for you, and I forgot. But if you'd like it, I'll scan your badge, and then I'll email it to you. But chenetwork.org, this is the parent. I guess it's an organization, parent organization for Che. And I know when I first started learning about Che, I was really confused because I'd go on that website and then it would like have a list of trainings, but then it would send me to some other website, and like that's where I was like, okay, it's a lot of people have taken it and used it and provide the trainings. We actually did a training for LCMS folk a few years ago. That's where I got trained. And he'll give you his card, because I bet he does trainings. So, any questions? So now you have an entry-level understanding of what Che is. Had any of you ever heard of Che before? Okay, so now you know more than you did. So. Yeah, this is my last slide. So I'll hang around. Like I said, if you want more info, or if you want me to email you any of this, I can scan your badge and make a note to send it to you. Otherwise, thank you for coming, and
Thank you.
yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Good way to start.